they're in your body, they're probably in the kids' bodies as well. The mentions about us getting herpes, about the fact that the kids maybe is more vulnerable. We'll talk about that a little.
Incorrectly.
Isn't it interesting? You're doing what you think is right for your family, and yet without realizing it, even wholesome foods, like dairy, might be introducing. We're not doing it the right way. Some of these plastics. And Angela, how do you feel knowing your levels are so high?
I'm nervous. I'm fearful. My biggest fear is the long term, the cancer. And now, is it reversible? Can I change it?
Can I set your heart at ease a little here? It is reversible. Yeah. And how is the question, right? That's why we're all here today. But that's the big issue. How do you do it? But I can tell you this, it can be done, and that's what the show's about. And we can do it ourselves. You don't have to wait for anyone else to change anything. And if we can do this the right way, we'll change a lot of other minds today and save a lot of people. All right, help me sound the alarm. Pediatrician Dr. Alan Green, an activist mother, Maya James, who's made it her mission to get phthalates out of her family's food. Stop being extraneous again. Maya, I appreciate it. Are you surprised at the levels that we found in our audience?
So phthalates are man-made chemicals that didn't even exist until the 20th century. And now studies have shown that they're in most of us. There was a recent big study testing a whole bunch of different phthalates, and 98% of urine tests were positive for phthalates.
So, two of our guests, Lisa and Angela, tested the 95th percentile. What does this really mean? I mean, what do these chemicals do? What are the risks?
Shockingly little about phthalates, but there are a couple things we do know. We do know that when they're given to animals in carefully controlled studies, they cause certain health problems. And we also know that if you just go out and measure phthalate levels in people, they tend to have a higher rate of those same problems. But that's not enough to prove the cause, but it is enough to really be concerned. So what kinds of things are we talking about? Number one is reproductive problems. And in men, this might be things like testicular dysfunction. In women, things like endometriosis. And in baby boys, things like genital malformation, genitals not forming normally.
So a big problem.
Big problems. Number two is increased waist circumference. And we're talking about people with higher phthalate levels having a bigger waist size, even if they eat the exact same number of calories and have the exact same exercise. So it changes metabolism. Number three, or it potentially changes metabolism. Number three is, along that same lines, increased insulin resistance. Problems with blood sugar. It's a precursor to diabetes.
These are some of the fundamental problems we face in America. You're talking about obesity and infertility and diabetes. Maya, why are you so passionate about phthalates?
Well, because I'm someone who had what most people would consider a very healthful diet, and during my pregnancies I was probably a bit smug about all the wonderful nutrition I was providing for my unborn baby. And as I started to dig a little deeper and learned that even in the foods that we consider very healthful, there are all of these chemicals, phthalates being the most frightening, that are still getting in our bodies, and particularly when you're pregnant, I know that just becomes terrifying.
You're a mom.
Yeah.
That's why I wanted you to actually be here. I think you speak for so many women who are trying to do the right things. You're making all of the decisions you think your family will benefit from, just like these wonderful women we tested today. And yet there's phthalates in your family's table. How do you avoid it? How do you change that?
I mean, honestly, it's difficult because, again, it's not intuitive. These phthalates are not found in typically what we think of as junk food. So you have to educate yourself. This is why I started a business where I'm trying to help other moms figure out where chemicals are hiding and how to avoid them. So, plastic obviously is probably the biggest source. And so the fewer processed foods you have on your table, the fewer opportunities the food has had to come in contact with plastic. And then once it's in your home, storing it in glass or stainless steel, and just avoiding plastic really altogether.
Okay, how do you know if it's in your food?
Well, here's the thing. What we eat is now the major source of most phthalates that we get into our bodies, but it's never on the food label. It happens somewhere in the production or in the manufacturing or in the packaging or in the preparation or storage, but you don't know. So there's a few clues you can look at. The higher the fat the food, the more likely phthalates might be to hide there. And the other thing is, the more it's come into contact with certain plastics or certain pesticides along the way, the higher the chance of phthalates.
Lisa appropriately mentioned the fact she was worried about her kids. And, that's the first place the mom's mind goes. How big is this a deal of these phthalates for kids?
That's the first place my mind goes to. The National Toxicology Program has serious concern, their highest level of concern, about certain segments of kids. I think for good reason. limit for phthalates. And teenagers, adolescents, if they eat a high-fat diet, which a lot of teens do, routinely every day get more phthalates than the EPA safety limit.
Let's talk about some of these official statements. We actually reached out to the American Chemistry Council about phthalates found in our foods, and this is what they said in part. Phthalates have undergone numerous scientific reviews at government agencies, and the conclusions have been essentially the same. Phthalates used in commercial products do not pose a risk to human health at typical exposure levels. How do you respond to that?
Well, we just looked at this study showing that typical exposure levels at some ages and with some diet types do hit the U.S. government regulations. But that's some ages and some diet types. There was a recent 2014 study that said for all ages and all diet types, typical people are above the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission safe level, their allowable daily intake. But let's set aside regulations for a second and set aside the idea of business or politics and look at real-world people with real problems, with real levels and real exposures. And that's what these studies are we've been talking about. Now, most women are not going to get endometriosis, whether they've been exposed to phthalates or not. Most will not. But women at the 75th percentile or higher are more than 2 times more likely to end up with endometriosis. This is a real thing.
So let's talk about the real world. What should women do right now in their own homes to reduce the phthalate exposure they have?
So 4 tips. One of the places are consistently found at high levels are in the highest fat dairy products, things like cream and butter. The lower the fat, the lower the likelihood of phthalates, likely lower level of phthalates. Number 2, they're pretty high levels in meat and poultry often. We don't even know how it gets there. It might be from plastic containers from the feed. It might be from pesticide residue on the feed. It might be the wrapping that they're wrapped in. So my best bet when it comes, if you do meat or poultry, choose lean cuts or skinless poultry. To choose organic, pasture-fed if possible. To choose it freshly wrapped. It hasn't been sitting there for a while, and preferably wrapped in paper. Next one is, number 3, is fruits and vegetables. The more fruits and vegetables in the diet, typically the lower phthalate levels. And again, organic even better, because you can avoid some of those pesticides. And lastly, just think about plastic anywhere in the production, manufacturing, storage, preparation, wrapping, any of that. Try to avoid plastic with foods.
So, Maya, in your family right now, what do you do to reduce phthalates? Practical, simple things you do at home in the kitchen.
Yep, we've tried to cut out some of our meat and dairy consumption, pretty much exclusively organic and grass-fed dairy and meat where possible, and then just really being careful about storing anything in plastic and really never heating anything in plastic.
So let's break it down, Dr. Green, for these wonderful women over here who tested high, and I can guarantee for most people who hear my voice, because so many of us have phthalates in our blood, the majority of us. How long does it take to reduce the levels if you do the things talked about today?
So here's the good news. There was a really nice study. It was actually done in part by the government, by the EPA. And they took some healthy volunteers, middle of life, and they actually had them fast for a little bit. I'm not recommending this for everybody to not eat. But what they did is they measured their urinary phthalates. They did 118 different tests. And within 24 hours of stopping it in your food, just in your food, the levels went down 5 to 10 times lower than they were at the start. And they stayed low throughout the test until they went back on their regular diet and it shot back up again.
So within a day, you were seeing
within a day, you can be better off.
Thanks for the good news to both of you. To my wonderful audience members who are getting tested, for doing that as well. We'll be right back.
Coming up, are the diet foods you eat making you fat? What are your biggest challenges when buying them at the market? Aldi's favorites may be tripping you